Welcome back. We're at Cardin Children's Medical Center to discuss the most common chronic disease amongst children and adolescents. That's diabetes, and that's according to the Center of Disease Control and Prevention. Now, we're going to be joined today by a pediatric endocrinologist who's going to tell us more about the subject. Let me introduce you to Dr. Joel Hanke. He's a consultant for Cardin Children's Medical Center, as well as a pediatric endocrinologist. Dr. Hanke, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Forrest.
Doctor, we're seeing a lot of cases of diabetes in the field. Are you seeing the same case?
Yeah, we do see a lot more diabetes these days than we used to. Predominantly it's type 2 diabetes, but we are seeing also an increase in type 1 diabetes, which is classically called juvenile diabetes.
I understand this disease could be a silent killer. And according to the CDC, we're told that 13,000 young people are diagnosed with type 1 diabetes yearly. Is this the case?
That is correct. We predominantly see type 1 diabetes in the pediatric and adolescent age group. However, within certain ethnic minorities especially, we are seeing a much larger increase in type 2 diabetes, especially in the 10 to 20 age group.
Doctor, are most children at risk of only developing type 1 diabetes?
Actually, there's a risk of type 1 and type 2 diabetes. The risk of type 1 diabetes is predominantly a genetic combined with some other factor that we don't understand. But the risk of type 2 diabetes also exists, and it's certainly more common in certain ethnic minorities.
Can you tell us about the signs and the symptoms of diabetes?
The classic signs and symptoms of diabetes, and this we're talking more of juvenile diabetes or type 1 diabetes, is a presentation of increased thirst, increased urination, weight loss, fatigue, and those types of symptoms. Sometimes they mimic other diseases, and sometimes it becomes obvious immediately to the family if they have experience with diabetes that this is what it could be. With type 2 diabetes, on the other hand, it's more difficult because a lot of times there aren't symptoms early on, and it really takes a thorough doctor doing regular physical examinations, regular blood tests for screening to detect type 2 diabetes at an early stage. Otherwise, kids may have it for even a number of years before it gets diagnosed.
Okay. Now, what can we do as parents to prevent the onset of diabetes in our children?
The main thing for type 2 diabetes is to reduce calorie intake to reasonable portions for the children, and also to keep them very active. Everyone's born with a certain risk of type 2 diabetes in their genetic makeup, and that is modified by how much food we eat, how overweight we might become, how much or how little activity we will perform. So the types of foods, the quantity of foods and drinks that children will ingest is extremely important. And even if there is a strong history of type 2 diabetes in the family, it's definitely modifiable by reducing calorie intake, keeping their kids active. It's not like it's a certainty that their children will get diabetes.
Okay, and so when we're talking about getting diabetes, a lot of times you'll hear about cookies and sodas and things like that. Would that be an indicator of something that can lead to a child being more prone to getting diabetes?
With type 2 diabetes, that actually can be true. With type 1 diabetes, because it is not, our understanding of how it is caused is not really directly related to dietary intake and other factors that we understand at this time. But certainly excessive intake of sugars, sweets, fast foods, junk foods, things that are high in fat, high in processed sugars, definitely do contribute to the incidence of type 2 diabetes.
How do you get your child to put down cookies and soda?
That's an interesting question. I would say one of the easiest ways is to not let them get into that habit in the first place. But if your children are used to eating junk food on a regular basis, drinking lots of soda pop, one of the things that you as a parent have the control over is the groceries that come in through the door. The vast majority of children out there are not buying their own food supply and buying their own drinks, and it's the parents that have to supply those things for their children. It takes us as parents being wiser about what we purchase for our children, not providing them with excessive portion sizes, not providing them with unhealthy foods, and instead substituting things that are healthy for them, like fruits and vegetables and whole grains and things like that.
So how important would you say that it is to make good choices early on in life?
I would say it's extremely important. Our society in general, including our children and adolescents, have a significant problem right now with an increasing risk of diabetes. In the past 15 years, the prevalence of diabetes in the U.S. has more than doubled. And we're looking at serious increases in these numbers as time goes by in the next 5 to 10 years. So getting our children started on healthy eating habits very early on will help prevent these things for time to come.
Now tell me something. You and I have been involved in diabetes camp. When children have more activity and they're involved a lot more during camp, are they having to take more insulin or less insulin during that time?
Well, most definitely kids, and then we're talking about predominantly type 1 diabetes, but yes, their insulin needs are very much reduced when they're physically active. And many of the kids that go to camp, they're more physically active that week than they ever are during the rest of the year. And they find that their insulin doses sometimes have to be reduced in half or less because of that increased activity, which causes them to process their sugars more efficiently and not need as much insulin, which is always a benefit to them.
Dr. Hunke, how important is it for children to remain active? Because this just sounds devastating. It sounds like an epidemic, quite frankly.
Yeah, and it is categorized as an epidemic. I think physical activity is something that is extremely important, and it's something that we should all try to find ways for our children to be more active. We don't necessarily have those things built into their everyday life that used to be even 30, 40 years ago. The times where children would be running around the block playing for hours at end and mom calling for them to come home for dinner are not there anymore. We don't have those things. I mean, kids stay at home, they're doing more homework, they're playing video games, they're watching more TV, they're spending more time in front of screens, more inactive time. And parents are also working longer hours and not available to supervise their children's activity. Parents, frankly, don't feel comfortable sending their kids out to play because you hear about kidnappings and things on the news. Nobody wants to see their child end up in a wash somewhere. So, you know, there's a protective nature that we as parents have to balance with our need to get our children more active. And that struggle is what families have to go through when they're trying to determine the activity level of their child. And this is a societal problem. It's a global problem. You know, we have, as societies progress, we have more inactivity because of conveniences and transportation, and it gets to a point where it goes for several years and we start to see weight gain as a consequence. And it's a huge problem.
Now, when it comes to dietary or food choices, who are children's biggest role models with regard to that?
Most definitely the parents. And family mealtime is also one of those things that seems to have gone by the wayside for, I would say maybe a majority of families. So sitting down as a family, eating a meal that's prepared by the family from scratch or from fresh produce, fresh things, is relatively rare. And it might even be a special occasion for families that they do maybe once a week. But it's not the daily routine that it used to be. There's so much fast food and ready food and pre-prepared foods and frozen foods that are ready to go that keep us on, make us able to be on the go all the time and not have to sit down and spend time and focus on things like that. And I just believe that over time that translates into, the inactivity and the weight gain that we see because of these convenience things.
Well, Dr. Hunke, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Oh, thank you for having me here.
If you'd like more information on diabetes, go to the Center of Disease Control's website at cdc.gov. Coming up, we'll go shopping with a firefighter who's also a health expert. Stay tuned.